Hello, everyone, and welcome to Midnight Whispers. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. This is still the scariest thing that ever happened to me as a child. Not because anything actually happened, but because of how close it felt to something going very wrong and how powerless we were in that moment. It was also the first time I became aware of fear in a very adult way, the kind of fear that doesn't scream or panic, but goes completely silent and cold. We were camping with my family and a family we were close friends with. It was one of those group camping trips that felt exciting as a kid, full of freedom and novelty. There were campers set up in a loose cluster, adults chatting, kids running around, fires going, food cooking. Everything felt safe and familiar because it was surrounded by people we trusted. As the night went on, the adults drank more than usual. Not in a violent or angry way, just the kind of loud, a sloppy, happy drinking that ends with people laughing too hard and eventually passing out wherever they sit. By the time it got late, the fires had burned down to embers and most of the parents had retreated into their campers, exhausted and very drunk. Because of that, my friend, her cousin, and I were allowed to sleep in a tent together instead of a camper. At the time, that felt like the coolest thing in the world. We were old enough to feel grown, but still young enough to think danger only existed in obvious forms. The tent was set up a short distance away from the campers, close enough that we knew people were nearby, but far enough that it felt private and special. Inside the tent, we were buzzing with that late-night energy kids get when they know they're supposed to be sleeping but aren't. We whispered, giggled quietly. I talked about random things that felt incredibly important in the moment. Eventually, though, the excitement started to fade. Our voices got softer. The pauses between sentences got longer. We were settling into that in-between space right before sleep. It was probably around midnight. The campground had gone quiet in a way that felt different from earlier in the night. No more laughter, no more music, just the occasional crackle from dying embers and the ambient nighttime sounds you barely notice until everything else stops. Crickets, distant rustling, the kind of quiet that makes you suddenly aware of how dark it really is. That's when we heard it. The sound of shoes crunching on gravel. It wasn't loud, but it was clear, deliberate, close. The kind of sound you immediately recognize as footsteps, not an animal, not the wind. Human footsteps. And then, almost at the same time, we heard the jingle of a dog collar on a leash. All three of us froze. We weren't panicking yet. It was more like our bodies locked up before our brains could catch up. We stopped whispering mid-thought. No one moved. We just listened. Footsteps slowed, then stopped. A shadow appeared on the side of the tent that faced the gravel road. It wasn't sharp or detailed, just a soft outline, but it was unmistakably the shape of a tall man. You could tell by the height, the shoulders, the way he stood. The shadow lingered there, close enough that it felt invasive, like he was right on top of us, even though there was still fabric between us. I remember the silence inside the tent being absolute. Not a breath. Not a shift of fabric. It felt like even blinking would be too loud. I could see the whites of my friend's eyes in the dim light, wide and locked on each other, silently asking the same question. What do we do? Then the man spoke. His voice was soft, not aggressive, not loud, almost casual. That somehow made it worse. Hey there, girlies. Every muscle in my body went tight. That word alone made my stomach drop. Girlies. It felt wrong in a way I didn't yet have the language to explain. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't normal. It felt like something he had no right to say to us. None of us answered. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. I remember being aware of my own heartbeat, how loud it sounded in my ears, and wondering if he could hear it too. I was terrified that he would hear us breathing or sense us inside the tent, even though that was ridiculous. Fear isn't rational. "What are you girls up to so late?" he asked. Still, we said nothing. We were children, but something instinctual took over. We knew that responding would acknowledge him, that it would turn us from unseen into engaged. Even though we didn't consciously plan it, all three of us understood that silence felt safer than anything we could say. I remember thinking about the campers. They were close enough that we could see them earlier. But in that moment, they felt a million miles away. Inside those campers were our younger siblings, asleep and helpless, and our parents, passed out and drunk, completely unaware of what was happening. Even if we screamed, would they wake up in time? Would they understand what was happening? Or would it just cause chaos and confusion? We were very suddenly aware that we were on our own. The man didn't speak again right away. Instead, he hummed quietly to himself, not loudly, just enough that we could hear it, like he was thinking, like he was considering something. That sound still unsettles me when I think about it. It felt deliberate, like he knew exactly what he was doing, like he was enjoying the moment of uncertainty. The dog shifted slightly, the collar jingling again. Time felt strange. I don't know how long he stood there. It could have been seconds. It could have been a minute. In my memory, it feels endless. My body felt frozen in a way I had never experienced before, like fear had turned me into something solid and immobile. Then the shadow moved. Slowly it pulled away from the tent. The footsteps resumed, crunching on gravel, getting quieter as he continued down the road. The jingle of the dog collar faded with them. We stayed frozen long after the sounds disappeared. None of us spoke. None of us moved. I don't know what we were waiting for, maybe confirmation that he was truly gone, or maybe we just didn't know how to exist normally again after that moment. Eventually, one of us whispered something. I don't even remember what. It didn't matter. The spell broke just enough for us to breathe again. Later, when we talked about it, we tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just some drunk guy walking his dog. That's a very reasonable explanation. Campgrounds have all kinds of people. People drink. People wander. People make poor choices without malicious intent. But even if that's true, it doesn't erase how it felt. That was the first time I realized that fear doesn't always come with obvious danger. Sometimes it comes quietly, politely, wrapped in something that could almost be explained away. And sometimes the scariest part isn't what happens, but what could have happened. It was also the first time I realized that in a situation like that, I didn't have the right instincts yet. I didn't know if we should scream, run, speak, or stay silent. We chose silence, and in this case, it worked. But at the time, it didn't feel like a choice. It felt like paralysis. 2 hours later, one of us had to pee. By then, we had calmed down a little. Enough to convince ourselves that the danger had passed. Enough to move. Enough to think rationally again. But that walk to the outhouses was the most paranoid journey of my childhood. Every shadow looked like a person. Every sound felt amplified. We moved fast, constantly looking over our shoulders, hearts pounding all over again. The outhouses had never felt so far away. When we finally made it back to the tent and zipped it closed behind us, the relief was overwhelming. Nothing else happened that night. But something had changed. That experience stuck with me, not as a dramatic story with a clear villain, but as a quiet lesson. A moment where I realized that safety is fragile, and that being young and protected is something you don't even notice until it cracks. To this day, I don't know exactly who that man was or what he intended. Maybe it really was nothing. Maybe he didn't mean harm. But fear doesn't require certainty. It only requires enough unknowns to make your body react before your mind can catch up. That night was the first time I understood that sometimes the scariest moments don't come with answers, and they don't end with resolution. They just leave you older in a way you didn't ask for. And that's why it still stands out as the scariest thing that ever happened to me as a child. My high school is one of those places where you don't really need rumors to believe something is wrong. Almost every faculty member who has worked there long enough has had some kind of experience. Not vague feelings or quick glances that can be brushed off, but moments that stuck with them. More than one teacher flat out refuses to be in the building alone at night. They don't joke about it, and they don't dramatize it. They just won't do it. I didn't really believe any of it at first. High schools are old. Noisy buildings. Pipes knock, doors shift, air pressure changes. It's easy to explain things away if you want to. But the longer I was there, the more stories I heard. And the more consistent they were, the harder it became to dismiss them all as coincidence. One story in particular has always stayed with me because of how calm and matter-of-fact the teacher was when he told it. He wasn't trying to scare anyone. He wasn't the type to exaggerate. He was practical, no nonsense, and honestly a little annoyed that it had happened at all. It happened on a weeknight. He had stayed late to finish grading and prep for the next day. It was around 9:30 at night, long after students had left and most of the staff were gone. The school at night feels completely different than it does during the day. The hallways are longer. The ceilings feel higher. Every sound echoes just a little too much. Fluorescent lights hum softly. And the air feels stale, like the building itself is holding its breath. He was in his classroom with the door open, papers spread across his desk, completely focused on his work. That's when he heard a door slam somewhere down the hall. Not a gentle close. Not a door clicking shut. A slam. His first thought wasn't fear. It was irritation. He assumed it was either another teacher still in the building or a janitor moving through the halls, maybe being careless or messing around. He leaned back in his chair, listened for a moment, and waited to hear footsteps or voices. Nothing. After a minute, he stood up and stepped into the hallway. The lights were on, the hall was empty, and the silence felt heavier now that he was standing in it. He looked both ways, expecting to see someone turning a corner or pushing a cart. No one was there. Annoyed more than concerned, he decided to investigate. He figured someone had to be nearby. Doors don't just slam on their own, at least not like that. He started walking down the hall in the direction the sound had come from. His footsteps echoed softly against the tile floor, the sound carrying farther than it would during the day. Halfway down the hall, he heard it again. Another door slammed. This time, it was closer. The sound came from a janitorial closet. He stopped walking and just stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door at the end of the hall. He later said this was the moment his irritation finally gave way to unease. Janitorial closets in that building are small, entirely brick rooms, no windows, no secondary exits, no places to hide. If someone was in there, they would have had to go in moments before. He walked up to the door slowly, his hand already reaching for the handle. He expected to catch someone red-handed. A janitor taking a break. A coworker playing a stupid prank. Something normal. He opened the door. The room was empty. No mop bucket. No cart. No person. Just cleaning supplies lined up against the brick walls and the faint smell of chemicals. There was nowhere for anyone to be. No sound of movement. No indication that the door had been touched by anyone other than him. That's when the fear hit him. He didn't scream. He didn't freeze. He didn't stand there trying to make sense of it. He closed the door, turned around, and walked back to his classroom faster than he normally would. He gathered his things, turned off the lights, locked the door, and left the building without looking back. When he told the story later, he laughed a little, but it was the kind of laugh people use when they're uncomfortable. He admitted he had never stayed late alone again after that. If he had work to finish, he did it earlier in the evening or took it home. If a colleague asked him to wait around for something after hours, he politely declined. And that was just one story. There are dozens like it. Teachers hearing footsteps following them down empty hallways, only for the sound to stop the moment they turn around. Classroom doors unlocking themselves after being checked and rechecked. Lights turning on in rooms that no one has entered for hours. A secretary once swore she heard a student calling her name from the stairwell, long after the building had been locked, only to find the stairwell empty and silent when she went to check. One science teacher claimed that every time he stayed late in his lab, the cabinets would creak open on their own. He tried taping them shut once, just to see if it would stop. The tape was peeled off by the next morning, not torn. Peeled, carefully. A custodian who had worked there for years told a small group of us that there were certain areas of the building he avoided after dark. Not because he believed in ghosts, but because something doesn't like being disturbed. He wouldn't elaborate beyond that. He just shrugged and said he'd learned to listen to his instincts. What makes it harder to dismiss is how consistent the stories are. Different people, different years, different parts of the building, but the same themes. Doors, hallways, closets, sounds of movement where there shouldn't be any. And always at night, when the building is mostly empty. There's also a general understanding among the staff that if you have to be there late, you make sure someone else is in the building with you. Lights on in more than one room. Doors left open. Small things, but everyone does them without really talking about why. I asked once if anyone knew the history of the school. It's old. Much older than it looks. Parts of it were built decades apart, added onto and renovated so many times that some hallways don't quite line up the way they should. There are sections that feel forgotten, even during the day. Basements that aren't on any maps students are given. Storage rooms that used to be something else entirely. No one ever gave me a clear answer about deaths or tragedies tied to the building. Some said it used to be a different kind of institution before it was a school. Others said it was built on land that had been used for something else long before that. Most people just shrugged and said, old buildings have memories. What stuck with me most wasn't any single story, but the way the teachers talked about them. They didn't sound excited. They didn't sound proud of having something creepy to share. They sounded cautious, respectful, like they had learned the building had rules of its own. Even now, years later, when I think about that school, I don't remember lockers or classrooms first. I remember empty hallways at night. The echo of a door slamming when no one else is around. The way adults who are normally confident and composed suddenly look uneasy when the topic comes up. Some places just feel watched when they're empty. And my high school was one of them. In high school, I had a close friend named Steve. We'd known each other since freshman year, back around 2007, the kind of friendship where you hang out after school, share music, and talk about whatever weird stuff comes to mind. One afternoon, while we were all just sitting around talking, Steve told our group a story that stuck with me in a way I still can't fully explain. At the time, I brushed it off as just another creepy story passed down between siblings, but years later, things happened that made me seriously question that reaction. The story wasn't about Steve himself. It was about his older brother, Tim. Tim had gone off to college somewhere in New Hampshire a couple of years earlier. I don't remember the exact town, but from the way Steve described it, it was the kind of college town surrounded by a lot of woods, long stretches of highway, and not much else around. The sort of place where things feel quiet during the day and unsettling at night. One night, around 2 in the morning, Tim and one of his close friends were hanging out and got the kind of idea that only makes sense when you're young and tired and a little bored. They decided they really wanted Dunkin' Donuts. The problem was that the nearest Dunkin' Donuts wasn't nearby at all. Apparently, it was across state lines. Still, that didn't stop them. They figured it would be a fun late-night drive, something to break the monotony. From what I was told, getting there meant driving down a narrow highway that cut straight through dense woods. No streetlights, very few cars, and long stretches where you feel like you're completely alone. The kind of road where your headlights feel small compared to the darkness around you. They made it to Dunkin' Donuts without any issues, got their food, joked around, and started heading back toward campus. That's when things started to feel wrong. On the way back, a car pulled in front of them on the highway. At first, this didn't seem like a big deal. It was late. But seeing another car wasn't unheard of. What stood out immediately, though, was the car itself. It was a red, compact car. Nothing fancy, nothing distinctive in terms of model. What made it strange was that any identifying markings looked scratched off, like someone had deliberately removed or damaged them. The most unsettling detail, though, was the license plate. Tim said the plate didn't look normal. Instead of a standard plate with clear numbers and letters, it had a black letter O and a green letter M. Nothing else that made sense. Just those two letters standing out in different colors. That detail alone made it stick in his mind. Around this time, Tim started noticing little things that felt off. His phone suddenly lost service, even though it shouldn't have in that area. The radio, which had been playing a jazz station, abruptly switched to Smells Like Teen Spirit. On their own, these things could have been coincidences. Bad signal happens. Radio stations glitch. But stacked together, in the middle of the woods at 2 in the morning, they added to a growing sense of unease. Tim and his friend both got a bad feeling about the car in front of them. Nothing overt had happened yet, but there was something about the way it was driving that made them uncomfortable. So Tim decided to slow down, figuring he'd just let the red car go on its way. He eased off the gas and let the distance close, expecting the other driver to keep going. Instead, the red car slowed down too. That's when the fear really started to set in. It wasn't aggressive driving, not yet, just matching their speed. Tim thought maybe it was a coincidence, so he tried speeding up slightly to pass it. As soon as he did, the red car sped up as well, keeping the same distance ahead of them. They tried slowing down again. The red car slowed down. They sped up. The red car sped up. At this point, both Tim and his friend were fully aware that whatever was happening was intentional. This wasn't just another driver coincidentally adjusting their speed. This was someone actively pacing them. They were panicking. Their adrenaline was through the roof. They had no idea who was in that car or what they wanted. All they knew was that they were alone on a dark highway, deep in the woods, with a car that refused to let them go. Up ahead, they saw a curve in the road. As the red car rounded the curve, Tim made a split-second decision. He stopped the car completely. He figured that if they stayed still, the other car would eventually go on its way. Maybe the driver would get bored. Maybe they'd just disappear into the darkness. They sat there, hearts pounding, staring into the darkness ahead. Tim said it felt like they were stopped for 20 minutes, though it might have been less. Time stretches in moments like that. Every sound feels louder. Every second feels longer. Eventually, they worked up the courage to move again. They told themselves that maybe they were overreacting. Maybe the car was gone. Maybe whatever weird game was happening was over. They slowly drove forward and rounded the curve. The red car was still there. Not closer, not farther away. The exact same distance ahead of them, matching their speed perfectly, as if nothing had changed. It was like the pause had never happened, like the car had simply been waiting. At that point, they realized there was no escaping it on that stretch of road. They had no choice but to keep driving and hope they made it out alive. They didn't try to pass. They didn't try to stop again. They just followed, tense and silent, watching the red car like it was a predator. Eventually, they came to a fork in the highway. One direction led toward the college town. The other led deeper into the woods, away from anything familiar. Tim took the road toward home. The red car, took the other path and disappeared into the darkness. Tim never saw it again. When Steve first told us this story, we didn't know what to think. It sounded creepy, sure, but also like the kind of thing that could be exaggerated over time. Even Steve wasn't completely sure if every detail was accurate. He admitted that he hadn't been there himself, and that memory can play tricks on people. I believed it was probably just a strange encounter with a creepy driver. Something scary, but not supernatural or significant beyond that. Then came the first epilogue. Sometime around 2008 or 2009, I was doing homework late one night with the radio on in the background. I was listening to a local talk radio station when they broke in with a news bulletin. They were reporting on a murder that had occurred the previous night in a neighboring county. What caught my attention was the description of the suspect's vehicle. The sole witness had seen a car leaving the scene. She described it as a red compact car. The license plate, she said, had a black O and a green M. I froze. I remember my stomach dropping and my heart racing. This was in suburban Orange County, California, thousands of miles away from New Hampshire. I tried to convince myself I had misheard it, that maybe my brain was filling in details because of the story I'd heard. The next day at school, I ran into Steve. I didn't even ease into the conversation. I asked him straight up if he had heard the radio report the night before. He had. He was just as shaken as I was. That moment changed everything. We both realized two things at the same time. First, neither of us was crazy. We had both heard the same thing. Second, whatever OM was, it wasn't confined to one place. It wasn't just a weird local story from New Hampshire. OM was real. Years passed. Life moved on. College, jobs, relationships. OM became one of those stories we talked about occasionally. Usually late at night, half joking, half serious. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it was a copycat story. Maybe there were multiple cars with weird plates. But no explanation ever fully sat right. Then came the second epilogue. This one hit much closer to home. Just this past May, my friend Blake was driving home, around 2 in the morning after dropping off his girlfriend. For reasons he couldn't explain, he decided to take a highway that cut through a canyon instead of his usual route. It was quieter, darker, and less traveled. The kind of road you don't take unless you're alone and not thinking too hard about it. While driving, a car pulled in front of him, a red compact car. Blake noticed the license plate almost immediately. A black O, a green M. Blake had heard the stories. He didn't try to pass. He didn't try to speed up. He did the opposite. He slowed down and stayed as far back as OM would allow. He said the car seemed aware of him in the same way Tim had described years earlier, adjusting speed, maintaining distance. Blake was terrified. When they reached near the end of the canyon, OM did something unexpected. The red car made a U-turn and headed back the way it came, disappearing into the darkness behind them. Blake didn't look back. He drove straight home, locked his doors, and didn't sleep much that night. That's everything I know about OM. I don't know who or what is behind that car. I don't know if it's one person, multiple people, or something else entirely. The most logical explanation I can come up with is that OM is a serial killer who travels across state lines to confuse police and witnesses. Someone who uses fear and isolation as a weapon. Someone who enjoys the hunt more than the kill. But even that explanation doesn't fully account for the patterns, the timing, the consistency. The same car, the same plate, the same behavior. Over years, across states. I admit it's conjecture. I don't have proof. Just stories. Just shared experiences. Just that cold feeling in my chest every time I think about a red, compact car on a dark road at 2 in the morning. What I do know is this. If you're driving late at night through the woods or a canyon, and a red, compact car pulls in front of you, and its license plate has a black O and a green M, don't try to challenge it. Slow down. Stay back. Let it go. And pray you come to a fork in the road before it decides to follow you all the way home. When I was younger, my family lived in an apartment complex that my mother managed. Because of that, the property felt almost like an extension of our home. I knew the buildings, the stairwells, the hallways, and most of the residents. I spent a lot of time wandering around the complex, riding my bike, hanging out near the office, and watching my mom deal with tenants, maintenance issues, and everything else that came with managing a place like that. The first incident happened when I was still pretty young. Young enough that Halloween felt like a huge deal. The day before Halloween, my mom was in a playful mood and decided to tell us a scary story. She loved to joke around, and at the time, ghost stories felt harmless. We were all sitting together when she started talking about one of the apartments directly above ours, which was vacant at the time. She told us that, years earlier, a mother and her 2 little boys had died in that apartment. She described how, according to the story, if you listened closely late at night, you could still hear the sound of children running up and down the hallway above us. She leaned into it, lowering her voice, building tension, clearly enjoying how wide-eyed we were getting. At first, it was just a story. Then, right in the middle of her talking, we heard it. Footsteps, clear as day. Not creaks or settling noises, not pipes or something vague. It sounded exactly like children running back and forth across the floor above us. Fast, uneven footsteps, like kids chasing each other, moving from one end of the apartment to the other. The room went dead silent. I remember looking at my mom's face and instantly knowing something was very wrong. The playful expression vanished. She went completely pale. The fear on her face wasn't exaggerated or performative. It was real, immediate terror. She hadn't expected that sound. She hadn't planned it. And whatever was happening upstairs, she suddenly knew wasn't part of a joke. She didn't waste time trying to rationalize it in front of us. She picked up the phone and called the police officer who patrolled the neighborhood regularly, along with one of the on-duty maintenance workers. She told them someone might be inside the vacant apartment. They arrived quickly. The officer and the maintenance guy went upstairs together to check the unit, while we waited below, listening in absolute silence. Every sound from above felt amplified. Doors opening. Voices echoing faintly. Movement. What they found wasn't a ghost. A homeless mother had slipped into the apartment through an open window with her 2 children and had been living there for some time. They had been using the vacant unit as shelter, probably thinking no one would notice since it wasn't being rented out. The realization hit hard. Those footsteps weren't spirits or echoes of the past. They were real children, alive, running around in an empty apartment while we sat below listening in fear. The situation was sad, complicated, and uncomfortable. But one thing was clear. My mother never told another ghost story again. The second incident happened years later at a completely different apartment complex that my mother managed. I was older by then, old enough to understand how dangerous things could be and how quickly situations could turn bad. By this point, I often went with her when she checked vacant apartments, especially if no maintenance staff were on duty. It was just easier and felt safer to be together. That day seemed normal at first. She was going through vacant units to see if anything needed to be repaired or replaced before showing them to potential renters. We had already checked a few apartments and everything was routine. Empty rooms, a little dusty, maybe a broken fixture here or there. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then we reached one unit that immediately felt wrong. When my mom put her hand on the door, it opened without resistance. She didn't have to turn the knob. The door just swung inward. The lock had been broken. I remember noticing it, but brushing it off. I assumed neighborhood kids had messed with it, or someone had tried to break in and failed. I didn't think much of it at the time. In hindsight, that moment should have been a warning. I stepped into the living room and drifted toward the window, looking outside, half paying attention. My mom walked toward the master bedroom to check it, like she always did. Then I heard her scream. It wasn't a startled yell or a quick reaction. It was a full, terrified scream that instantly sent adrenaline through my body. I didn't think. I just ran. I sprinted down the short hallway toward the bedroom as fast as I could. When I got there, the image burned itself into my memory permanently. Inside the closet was a girl, pale as snow, half naked. Her fingernails dug into the wall like she was trying to climb into it. Her eyes were wide with shock and terror. She looked frozen in place, like her body had shut down. For a split second, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. Then my mom yelled at me to go get help. I turned and ran back toward the main office as fast as I could. As I passed through the kitchen, the place where I had been standing just moments earlier, I saw him. A man, about 6'3", moving fast, bolting out of the kitchen and toward the exit. The realization hit me instantly. He had been there the entire time, standing close enough that I could have touched him. Close enough that if he had wanted to, he could have attacked me or my mother without warning. I didn't hesitate. I chased him. Adrenaline took over completely. I ran after him through the complex, yelling, heart pounding, vision narrowed. I chased him for what felt like forever, probably 400 or 500 feet, until I lost sight of him between buildings. He was faster, and he knew the area well enough to disappear. I stopped, gasping for air, realizing I wasn't going to catch him. I ran back. By the time help arrived, it was clear what had been happening. The girl was in the middle of being sexually assaulted when we walked in. If we had arrived even a few minutes later, if my mom hadn't screamed when she did, if I hadn't been there with her, the outcome could have been far worse. The police handled the rest. Statements were taken. The girl was taken to the hospital. My mom was shaking. I was shaking. The apartment felt poisoned after that. Like something terrible had soaked into the walls. That day changed the way I saw everything. Apartment complexes, vacant units, open doors, the assumption that empty spaces are safe, the belief that danger announces itself before it appears. None of that felt true anymore. Both of those experiences taught me the same lesson in very different ways. Sometimes the scariest things aren't ghosts. Sometimes the footsteps you hear aren't from the past. Sometimes the open door isn't just a broken lock. Sometimes the real horror is already there, breathing, watching, waiting, and you only realize it when it's almost too late. And yeah, if you skip to the end instead of reading it, that's on you. I grew up in a house that was already old long before any of us were born. It was built in 1856, and even as a kid, I always felt that age when I walked through it. The floors creaked no matter how carefully you stepped. The walls felt thick and solid, like they had seen generations come and go. It wasn't a stereotypically creepy house, no peeling wallpaper or broken staircases, but it carried a weight to it, a quiet presence, the kind of place that never truly feels empty, even when you're alone. The layout of the house is important to understand why what happened that night shook me so deeply. The dining room sat at the front of the house and had a large window that faced the front porch. The porch itself wrapped around the house, running from the front all the way to a kitchen door on the side. Right next to the dining room was the living room, positioned in such a way that if you were sitting on the couch watching TV, you had a clear, unobstructed view of that dining room window. You could see straight through it without even turning your head much. One night, years later, I was home visiting from college. It was one of those quiet visits where nothing special was planned. My mother had gone to bed early. My father and sister weren't home that night. I was the only one awake in the house, sitting in the living room with the TV on low, half watching, half dozing. The house felt especially quiet, the kind of quiet where you're aware of every small sound, every shift of the wood as it settles. I wasn't scared at first. I was relaxed, comfortable, and familiar with every sound that house usually made. Then I heard something that didn't belong. It was a small clicking noise, not loud, not sudden, just a sharp, deliberate click that immediately pulled my attention away from the TV. My eyes moved almost automatically toward the dining room window. I wasn't expecting to see anything. I think that's what made it worse. Standing at the window was a silhouette. It was the outline of a large man. Broad shoulders, tall. He looked like he was wearing either a flannel shirt or a heavy coat, something bulky. On his head was a baseball cap. He was standing close enough to the window that his shape filled a large portion of it. And he wasn't moving. He was facing into the house. For a split second, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. I remember thinking it didn't make sense. This was my home. This was private property. It was late. No one should be standing there. But the longer I stared, the more undeniable it became. Someone was on the porch, looking inside. My heart felt like it slammed into my ribs. I could hear it pounding in my ears. Every muscle in my body tensed at once, but I didn't move. I didn't jump. I didn't gasp. I didn't even shift on the couch. One thought dominated everything else. If he sees that I see him, something bad will happen. I stayed completely still, staring without moving my head, using only my eyes. The silhouette didn't move. No knocking, no waving, no attempt to get my attention. Just standing there, watching. The idea that he might be studying the room, watching me breathe, watching my hands, sent a wave of fear through me that I still can't fully describe. I made the decision to move without reacting. Slowly, as calmly as I could, I stood up from the couch and began walking toward the stairs. I didn't look at the window again. I didn't want him to know that I was aware of him. My movements were controlled, deliberate, as if I were just heading to bed like nothing was wrong. The moment I reached the bottom of the stairs, I ran. I sprinted up to my room, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. Once inside, I didn't hesitate. I went straight to where I kept my .35 caliber Marlin, 336C. My hands were shaking as I loaded it, but the motions were familiar, automatic. Muscle memory kicked in, cutting through the fear just enough to let me function. I also grabbed my uncle's combat knife. He had carried it in Vietnam, and I had always kept it more as a keepsake than a weapon. That night, it felt like the most solid thing in my hands. Armed and breathing hard, I forced myself to slow down. I didn't want to rush blindly into something I didn't understand. I took a moment to listen. The house was silent. No footsteps. No voices. No movement on the porch that I could hear. I walked back downstairs. Every light in the house went on as I moved through it. The warm glow did little to ease my nerves, but it made the space feel less vulnerable. When I reached the kitchen, I didn't ease the door open. I kicked it open hard, stepping outside as I cocked the rifle. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I have a gun. Come out, and I won't shoot you." I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I spoke firmly, clearly, projecting control I wasn't sure I actually had. I fully expected someone to step forward, to hear a voice, to see movement in the shadows beyond the porch light. Instead, I heard footsteps, 2 of them. Heavy footsteps on the wooden porch. They were unmistakable. The boards creaked under weight. Someone was there. The sound was real, physical, undeniable. Adrenaline surged through me as I swung around toward the front porch, rifle raised, completely prepared to confront whoever had been standing at that window moments earlier. There was nothing. The porch was empty. No man, no movement, no sound. Just the night air and the faint rustle of leaves in the distance. The place where the silhouette had been standing was completely clear, illuminated by the porch light. I stood there, frozen, my finger off the trigger but my grip tight, scanning every shadow. I waited, listening for any sign of movement. Nothing came. I didn't go back inside. Instead, I spent the next hours searching the entire property. The land around the house was about 2.5 acres, a mix of yard, trees, and uneven ground. I walked the perimeter slowly, methodically, checking every corner, every tree line, every place someone could hide. I found no footprints, no disturbed ground, no open gates, no signs that anyone had been there at all. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had heard. Eventually, exhaustion forced me back inside. I locked every door. I checked every window. I sat in the living room with the rifle nearby until the sun started to come up. I didn't sleep that night, or the next, or any night that week. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow felt suspicious. I kept replaying the image of that silhouette in my mind, trying to remember details. The cap, the shoulders. The way he stood so still, like he had all the time in the world. What unsettled me most wasn't the possibility that someone had been trespassing. That alone would have been terrifying enough. It was the way he vanished, the way the footsteps existed without a body to match them, the way there was no trace of anyone ever being there. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe a shadow cast by something on the porch. Maybe an animal made the footsteps. But none of those explanations fit what I experienced. Animals don't stand motionless at windows. Shadows don't wear baseball caps. And footsteps don't come from nothing. That house had always felt old. But after that night, it felt aware. I never saw the silhouette again, and nothing like that ever happened while I was home after that. But I also never truly relaxed there again. Even now, when I think about that night, I feel that same tightness in my chest, that same instinctive understanding that whatever was standing on that porch didn't want to be seen. And maybe that's the part that still keeps me up sometimes. The idea that something was there, watching, listening, choosing when to move and when to disappear. The idea that I only caught a glimpse of it because it wanted me to. I don't know who or what was standing outside that window, but I know one thing for sure. I was not alone that night. This story didn't happen to me, but it happened to my mother's uncle back in the 1970s in India. When my mom first told me about it, I honestly didn't believe her. It sounded like folklore, superstition, the kind of thing people exaggerate over time. That changed completely the year before he passed away, when I met him in person. After that, I stopped questioning it. My mother's uncle, who I'll just call UN Cool, lived in a rural village in India. This was a place where electricity technically existed, but it wasn't reliable at all. Once the sun went down, the village became almost completely dark. No streetlights, no glowing windows, no hum of modern life. Just darkness, insects, and silence. People planned their lives around daylight because night was something you endured, not enjoyed. Unkad was not a foolish or superstitious man. That's important. He was sharp, intelligent, and well-respected in his community. He worked as an accountant and was known for being reliable and disciplined. He would ride his bicycle long distances between villages to meet clients, keeping records by hand, handling money, and advising people who trusted him completely. He had a wife and children. By all accounts, he was a normal, capable man. One evening, he was riding his bicycle back home from a neighboring village. The path he took was narrow and isolated, cutting through fields and patches of trees. There were no houses nearby, no lamps, no other travelers. Just a dark road and the sound of his bicycle tires against the dirt. Nights like this were common for him. He had done this ride many times before. As he was pedaling, he heard a voice calling out to him from behind. At first, it didn't register. Then the realization hit him, and his blood ran cold. The voice sounded exactly like his daughter's. This alone would have terrified anyone, but what made it unbearable was the fact that his daughter had died years earlier. She had passed away at the age of 5. There was no possible way she could be there, on a dark road, in the middle of nowhere, calling his name. He knew he was alone. He knew there was no one else on that path. And yet the voice continued, calling out to him, sounding gentle, familiar, pleading. Unk was instantly overwhelmed with fear. In Indian superstition and folklore, there is a very old belief about this exact situation. You are never supposed to turn around if you hear the voice of a loved one, calling you on a dark, lonely road, especially at night. It is said that such voices are not the spirits of the dead, but something else entirely. malicious entities that imitate familiar voices to lure you, to get your attention, to make you acknowledge them. Everyone in rural areas knows this belief. It's something children grow up hearing. Unc knew it too. Terrified, he pedaled faster. He tried to keep his eyes forward, focusing only on the road ahead. His heart was racing, his legs burning as he pushed himself harder than he ever had before. The voice followed him, still calling out from behind, still sounding like his little girl. He was fighting panic, trying to convince himself it wasn't real, trying to just get home. He knew that if he didn't look back, if he didn't respond, whatever it was might leave him alone. But for reasons no one will ever understand, he looked back. From that moment on, he was never the same. Uncle made it home that night. He didn't disappear. He didn't die on the road. But something in him broke permanently. When he arrived, his family immediately knew something was wrong. He was shaken in a way they had never seen before. He was distant, incoherent, and visibly terrified. He could barely speak. He refused to explain what had happened. Over time, his condition only worsened. The intelligent, respected accountant slowly faded away. He became withdrawn, unstable, and mentally unwell. He would mumble to himself, stare off into nothing, and react with fear to things no one else could see. He could no longer work. He could barely function. His family tried to help him, tried to get him to talk, tried to understand what he had seen. He never told anyone. Not his wife. Not his children. Not his siblings. Not my mother. Not me. When I met him years later, near the end of his life, I finally understood why the story had haunted my family for so long. He sat quietly, barely speaking, his body frail, his mind clearly somewhere else. But it was his eyes that shook me. There was something wrong in them. They weren't just the eyes of an old man. They weren't dull or empty in a normal way. They looked afraid, always afraid. Like he was still seeing something, still remembering something, still trapped in a moment that never ended for him. I tried to speak with him gently. I asked him simple questions. I even brought up his past, hoping it might spark something familiar. When I mentioned the night he rode his bike home, his expression changed. His body stiffened. His eyes darted away. He shut down completely. That was the only reaction I ever got. After meeting him, I stopped dismissing the story as superstition or exaggeration. Whatever happened to him on that road destroyed him in a way that decades could not heal. No illness, no injury, no known trauma could explain such a complete and permanent change. People can argue that it was psychological, that grief, stress, or guilt manifested into mental illness. Maybe that's true. But that explanation doesn't account for the timing, or the voice, or the way his life ended the moment he looked back. What stays with me the most isn't the idea of demons or folklore. It's the fact that a strong, intelligent man encountered something so terrifying that he carried it with him until his death and refused to speak of it to anyone. That look in his eyes when I met him still freaks me out to this day, because it didn't look like madness. It looked like someone who's sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers for daily true horror stories that stay with you long after they're told, quietly unsettling and meant for the late hours. You can also turn on notifications so you're always here when a new story arrives and the night begins to stir again. Now, let's continue. Analysis from time to time, and I know that people usually explain it by saying that the brain wakes up before the body does, and hallucinations are common during that state. I understand all of that. I've read about it. I've tried to rationalize it. But none of that really helps when it's happening, especially because what I see is always the same thing. Every single time. It never starts suddenly. It always comes on slowly, like my mind is drifting up out of sleep, but my body is still trapped somewhere deep below the surface. I'll be asleep, dreaming normally, and then there's this subtle shift. The dream fades, but I don't wake up the way you normally do. Instead, I become aware that I'm in my bed, aware that something is wrong. The first thing I notice is sound, whispers. They're everywhere. Not coming from one direction, not loud enough to understand, but unmistakably there. It sounds like dozens of voices talking at once, all just under the level of clarity. I can't make out words, but I can hear the rhythm of speech, the breath behind it, the closeness. It feels intimate and invasive, like they're right next to my ears, like they're leaning in toward me. Then comes the pressure. It starts in my chest, a heavy weight pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. It feels exactly like someone is sitting on me, not standing, not leaning, sitting. The weight is centered, deliberate, and crushing. I try to take a deep breath and can't. My lungs only fill halfway before the pressure stops them. That's usually when panic kicks in. I try to move. I try to lift my arms, turn my head, kick my legs, anything. Nothing responds. My body feels like it's been poured into concrete. I'm fully aware, fully conscious, and completely trapped. My heart is racing, but my chest barely moves. The whispers get louder, closer, more insistent, like they're reacting to my fear. Eventually, I force my eyes open. I never want to, but I always do. Sitting on my chest is a little girl. She's small, light enough that she shouldn't be able to create that much pressure, but somehow she does. She's wearing an old-fashioned white lace dress, the kind you'd see in very old photographs. It looks delicate and worn, like it belongs to another time entirely. Her long black hair hangs straight down her back, obscuring her face completely. She's facing away from me. That detail somehow makes it worse. If she were facing me already, if I could just see her face right away, maybe my brain could process it faster, dismiss it as a hallucination. But the way she sits there, calmly, with her back to me, feels intentional. Like she knows I'm watching her. Like she's giving me time to understand what's happening. The whispers get louder. I can feel her weight more clearly now. The pressure on my chest increases, like she's slowly shifting her weight forward, pressing down harder. My breathing becomes shallow and frantic. I can feel my pulse in my ears, pounding in time with the rising noise around me. Then she starts to move. Very slowly, she begins to turn her head backward, over her shoulder, in a way that no one should be able to do comfortably. The movement is unnaturally smooth, deliberate, drawn out. It feels like it takes forever. Every fraction of a second stretches into something unbearable. As she turns, the whispering rises in volume. It's no longer just background noise. It fills the room, fills my head. It feels like it's inside me now, pressing against my thoughts, crowding out everything else. I want to scream, but I can't even open my mouth. I never let her finish turning her head. I always shut my eyes before I can see her face. I don't know what she looks like, and I don't want to know. The thought of seeing her expression, of making eye contact with whatever that thing is, feels like crossing a line I won't be able to come back from. There's something deep in me that says, once I see her face, something will change permanently. With my eyes closed, everything gets worse. The pressure on my chest intensifies again, like she's leaning forward now, like her hands are pressing into me. Breathing becomes almost impossible. Each inhale feels like dragging air through a narrow tube. The whispers reach a point where they're almost painful, a wall of sound that vibrates through my skull. Then, suddenly, it all stops. No whispers, no pressure, no movement, just silence. Not peaceful silence, not normal quiet. It's a heavy, unnatural silence that feels louder than the noise ever was. It feels like the moment after a scream cuts off, when your ears are still ringing and the world hasn't caught up yet. I lie there, frozen, eyes still tightly shut. I don't move right away. I don't breathe deeply. I don't open my eyes. I wait. I listen. I count my breaths as best I can. Slowly, I start to feel sensation returning to my body. My fingers twitch. My toes move. The paralysis loosens its grip inch by inch. Even when I know I can move again, I don't open my eyes. I'm terrified that if I do, she'll still be there. Or worse, that she won't be, and that somehow that will be even more unsettling. Instead, I force myself to roll slightly, to pull the blankets tighter around me, to focus on the familiar weight of the bed beneath me. Eventually, I force myself back to sleep. Not because I'm calm, but because I'm exhausted. My body feels wrung out, like I've just run for my life. My heart takes a long time to slow down. Even after I fall asleep again, the fear lingers, hanging over the rest of the night like a shadow. This has happened to me more than a dozen times. Always the same. Always the whispers. Always the pressure. Always the little girl in the white dress, sitting on my chest with her back turned to me. I've never seen her face. People tell me it's just sleep paralysis, that the brain creates familiar imagery, that fear feeds repetition, that once you expect something, your mind supplies it. That explanation makes sense on paper. It really does. But it doesn't change how real it feels in the moment. It doesn't explain why it's always the same figure, the same dress, the same movement, the same silence at the end. What bothers me the most isn't just the fear, it's the consistency. Dreams change, nightmares evolve, hallucinations are supposed to be chaotic, unpredictable. This isn't. This feels rehearsed, like a scene that plays out exactly the same way every time, down to the smallest detail. Once a month, sometimes more, I dread going to sleep because I don't know if it'll happen again. I lie there, hoping exhaustion will carry me straight into deep sleep without that horrible in-between state. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. When it happens, it leaves me shaken for the rest of the day. I feel detached, jumpy, like my sense of safety has been quietly undermined. Even though I know I was never actually in danger, my body doesn't believe that. My body remembers the weight, the whispers, the silence. I don't tell many people about it. When I do, they usually laugh nervously or try to explain it away as science. I let them. I don't argue. I don't claim it's supernatural. I don't say it's a ghost or a demon or anything like that. All I say is that it's real to me. It happens. And I hate it more than anything. I was with my boyfriend at the time. We were just lying in my bed with the lights turned off. Nothing strange was happening at first. We weren't talking, weren't moving much, just lying there in that quiet space where your mind starts to wander. It was late. The kind of late where the house feels different, heavier somehow, like the night has settled into the walls. Out of nowhere, he rolled over and hugged me really tightly. It wasn't unusual. He was affectionate like that, so at first I didn't think anything of it. I hugged him back automatically, pressing into his chest, expecting to feel comforted. But the moment I did, something hit me so hard it felt physical. If I hadn't already been lying down, I honestly think it would have knocked me off my feet. It was pure dread, not nervousness, not anxiety, not the tight, spiraling feeling I get with panic attacks. I've had those before, and this was not that. This was instant, overwhelming terror mixed with this deep, sinking sense that something was very wrong. It felt ancient, heavy, and intentional, like the fear itself had weight. I wrapped my arms around him tighter, gripping him like he was the only solid thing left in the room. Normally, he was always warm, almost radiating heat. But even in his arms, I felt ice cold. Not just chilled, but cold in a way that felt unnatural, like the warmth couldn't reach me. And then I felt it, that awful, evil presence. It felt like it was coming from the corner of my room. Not something I could see, but something I could sense with absolute certainty. Oh, it's hard to explain unless you felt it before. But it was like that feeling you get when you know someone is standing behind you, even if they haven't made a sound. Except this wasn't familiar or playful. It was wrong, hostile, watching. My entire body was screaming at me that we weren't alone. The feeling kept building, pressing in on me from all sides. My heart was racing, my chest felt tight, and my skin prickled like every nerve was on edge. I wanted to hide, but there was nowhere to go. I could feel whatever it was, and it felt aware of us, aware that we could feel it. Summoning every bit of courage I had, I finally spoke. My voice came out small and shaky. "Jay, do you feel that?" There was a brief pause, just long enough for my fear to spike even higher, and then he said yes. He said he felt it too. The cold, the heaviness. That same awful, evil feeling in the room. Hearing him confirm it made my stomach drop. Part of me had been hoping it was all in my head, that he would say no and laugh it off, but he didn't. He sounded scared, really scared. The whole thing, from the hug to that moment, couldn't have been more than 30 seconds or a minute, but it felt stretched out, like time was moving wrong. He decided to call his friend Matt, who was studying to be a youth pastor at the time. His hands were shaking as he grabbed his phone. I got up and turned the lights on as fast as I could, like the light itself might protect us. The room looked normal, exactly the same as it always did. But it didn't feel normal. The air still felt thick and wrong. I climbed back onto the bed, keeping my back to him, my eyes darting toward that corner of the room, even though I didn't want to look at it. He put Matt on speakerphone and explained what was happening. Matt didn't laugh. He didn't sound skeptical. He took it seriously right away. Matt started praying. Both of us closed our eyes and listened, praying silently in our heads. As the prayer went on, I could feel the atmosphere in the room start to change. It wasn't immediate, but slowly the pressure began to lift. The cold started to fade. The dread loosened its grip like something retreating, pulling back from the space. When the prayer ended, the room felt lighter, warmer, normal again. The horrible presence was gone. I felt exhausted, shaky, but relieved in a way that made my eyes burn with tears. We talked with Matt for a few minutes afterward. Just small talk, trying to calm down, trying to ground ourselves in something normal. Then Matt asked a question that made my blood run cold all over again. He asked if we had been talking while he was praying. We both immediately said no. We hadn't said a word. We were silent the entire time, just listening. Matt went quiet for a second, and then he told us something that still freaks me out when I think about it. He said that through the phone, while he was praying, he heard a deep, gravelly voice telling him to stop. He said that at the same time he felt an overwhelming, evil feeling come over him, strong enough that it almost made him stop praying. Hearing that made my stomach drop into my chest. Jay was completely freaked out after that. He didn't want to stay. He said he couldn't sleep there and needed to go home immediately. I was scared too, but I was also upset that he wouldn't stay with me. I didn't want to be alone in that room after what just happened. Still, he left, shaken and pale. After he drove off, the fear crept back in. Not as strong as before, but enough that I couldn't calm down. I went into my dad's room to tell him what happened, convinced that something evil had been in my room and that I wasn't safe. He was half asleep and barely understood what I was saying. He just muttered something about having a gun and that he'd shoot it if there was something there. That didn't help. I barely slept that night. Every sound made me jump. I kept staring at the corner of my room, expecting that feeling to come back. It didn't. But the memory of it stayed with me. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was something supernatural or something psychological or some terrifying overlap of both. All I know is that both of us felt it, and someone outside the room felt it too, through a phone call. And that's what still scares me the most. Not just that I felt it, but that it wasn't just me. I was 9 years old when this happened. And even though I didn't understand what was really going on at the time, the memory has stayed with me in a strange, heavy way. It's one of those moments that didn't feel terrifying while it was happening, but became horrifying later. Once I was old enough to understand how close everything came to going very wrong. It was St. Patrick's Day, which meant I was off from school. That alone made the day feel different, lighter than normal. I remember being happy about not having to wake up early or do homework. My mom had been seeing a guy for a while, and by that point, their relationship was clearly falling apart. I didn't know the details, only that things felt tense whenever we were around him. Conversations would get quiet when I entered the room, or suddenly stop altogether. There was always this edge in the air that made me uncomfortable, even if I couldn't explain why. That day, we went to his apartment. I don't remember exactly why. It could have been to pick something up, return something, or just talk. Adult reasons that didn't really register with me at 9 years old. I remember the building more than the purpose. It was an apartment complex, and I'm pretty sure he lived on the 3rd floor. I remember stairs, concrete, and the echo of footsteps as we went up. When we got inside, I sat in the living room. The place felt unfamiliar and cold in that way other people's homes sometimes do, especially when you don't feel welcome there. I remember sitting quietly, probably watching TV or just waiting, while my mom and him went into another room. At first, their voices were low, but it didn't take long for things to escalate. The arguing started suddenly. It wasn't just raised voices. It was yelling, angry, sharp yelling that cut through the apartment walls and made my stomach twist into knots. I remember sitting there frozen, not knowing what to do with myself. I didn't want to move, didn't want to draw attention, didn't want to be involved. Even at that age, I knew something wasn't right. Then my mom came into the living room, her face tight and serious, and told me to go outside. She didn't explain. She didn't sugarcoat it. Her voice had this urgency to it that I had never heard before. That alone was enough to scare me. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I just did what she said. I walked out of the apartment and into the hallway, then down the stairs. I remember standing outside the building, not really knowing where to go or what to do. I just waited. I remember the air feeling cold, even though I don't know what the weather was actually like. I remember the feeling of being small and alone, standing outside an apartment building with no real understanding of what was happening upstairs. After a short time, my mom came out. She was moving fast. She grabbed my hand, and we ran. Not a jog, not a hurried walk. We ran, straight to her SUV. I remember my heart pounding, my legs struggling to keep up, and the sound of our footsteps echoing in my ears. I remember her fumbling with the keys, her hands shaking as she unlocked the door. We got in, she slammed the door shut, locked it, and started the engine immediately. We drove away. I don't remember her saying much during the drive. I don't remember crying or screaming. I think I was too confused for that. I just knew that something bad had almost happened, even if I didn't know what that something was. For years, that's all the memory was to me. A strange, uncomfortable moment from childhood. An argument, a rushed escape, a relationship ending. It wasn't until I was much older that my mom finally told me the truth about what had happened in that apartment. He had been drunk. Not just tipsy, drunk enough to be dangerous. And he had a gun, a real gun, loaded. While they were arguing, things had escalated to the point where my mom realized she was in serious danger. At some point, she managed to get the gun away from him. I don't know exactly how. I don't know how close it came to being used. All I know is that she threw it as far as she could under his large bed. Far enough that he couldn't easily reach it, and then told me to get out. That detail is what still makes my stomach drop. The idea that while I was sitting in the living room, while I was being told to go outside, there was a loaded gun involved. The idea that one wrong move, 1 second too slow, one slightly different outcome could have changed everything. The idea that at 9 years old, I was closer to real violence than I ever realized. When I think back on it now, what scares me the most is how quiet it all seemed from my perspective. There was yelling, yes, but nothing that screamed immediate danger to a child. No gunshots, no physical fight that I saw, just raised voices and tension. And yet behind that door, something incredibly serious was happening. My mom never told me about the gun until years later, probably because she didn't want to scare me or because she was trying to protect me from the weight of that knowledge. I don't blame her for that. But when she finally did tell me, everything clicked into place in a way that made the memory feel entirely different. Suddenly, her urgency made sense. Suddenly, the way she told me to go outside, the way she ran, the way she didn't look back, all of it made sense. Suddenly, I understood that she wasn't just ending a bad relationship that day. She was saving our lives. I think about how easily things could have gone another way. If she hadn't been able to get the gun, if he had blocked the door, if I hadn't listened and gone outside immediately, if he had followed us, if he had decided not to let us leave. Those are thoughts that creep in late at night, uninvited, heavy and suffocating. That was the last time she ever saw him, and I'm grateful for that. Because even though I didn't fully understand it at the time, that day taught me something important about how danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides behind familiar faces. Sometimes it sounds like an argument behind a closed door. Sometimes it looks like an ordinary apartment on an ordinary day off from school. And sometimes you don't realize how close you came to tragedy until years later, when you finally understand just how thin the line really was. I've told this story before, and every time I think about it, it still creeps me out in a way that's hard to explain. It's not the kind of fear that makes you jump or scream. It's quieter than that, heavier, the kind that sinks into your chest and stays there long after the moment is over. This happened when I was in my 4th year of high school. My bedroom wasn't especially big, but the way it was laid out mattered a lot that night. Across the room from my bed, there was a small alcove. It wasn't a separate room, just a recessed space created by the way the walls and closet were positioned. The closet stuck out just enough that it blocked both the ceiling light and any ambient light coming in from outside at night. No matter what, that alcove stayed completely dark. During the day, it was nothing. Just a shadowy corner where I kept some stuff. At night, though, it felt different. It was like a pocket of darkness that didn't belong to the rest of the room. That night, I was lying in bed trying to sleep, but I couldn't. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular. I wasn't scared before it started. I was just awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for sleep to come. Then I got that feeling. The one where you feel like someone is staring at you. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't just a passing thought. It was intense and immediate. Like a switch had been flipped in my body. My chest felt tight. My stomach sank. Every instinct I had was telling me that something was watching me. What made it worse was the intent behind it. It didn't feel curious. It didn't feel neutral. It felt malicious. Like whatever was watching me wasn't just aware of me, but actively focused on me. I remember thinking that it felt hateful, cold, wrong. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was my imagination, that it was late, that I was tired, that your brain does weird things when you're half asleep. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to force myself to relax, but the feeling didn't go away. It got stronger. I finally opened my eyes, and without consciously deciding to, my gaze went straight to that dark alcove across the room. I didn't scan the room. I didn't look around. I looked exactly where I didn't want to look. Inside the darkness, I saw something. At first, it was just a shape, a hazy outline that was darker than the darkness around it. Not solid, not clear, but definitely there. Like a shadow that didn't match the room. My skin broke out in goosebumps instantly. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself it was just shadows playing tricks on me. The closet, the angle, my eyes adjusting to the dark. Anything but what my instincts were screaming at me. I closed my eyes again. I tried to breathe slowly. I tried to think about normal things. I tried to convince myself that if I just went to sleep, the feeling would stop. But it didn't. The sense of being watched became unbearable. It felt closer, more focused. Like whatever it was had noticed that I noticed it. My heart was pounding now. My ears felt hot. My hands were clenched into the sheets without me realizing it. I knew I didn't want to open my eyes again, but I did. And that's when I saw it right beside my bed. The shadow was no longer in the alcove. It was right there, bent over me. I don't remember seeing a face clearly, but I remember knowing exactly where its head was. Right above mine, staring straight down at me. The shape was taller now, more defined, but still wrong. Like it didn't fully belong in the physical world. The darkness around it seemed to fold inward, like the light was being pulled away. Every internal alarm I had went off at once. Fight, flight, freeze. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move properly. My body felt locked in place, like all the fear had compressed me into the mattress. My mind was racing, but my body refused to respond. The only thing I could do was grab my pillow and blanket and throw them over my head. I covered myself completely, curled into myself, and started crying. I don't remember falling asleep. I just remember sobbing quietly under the covers, convincing myself not to look again, not to move, not to breathe too loudly. Eventually, exhaustion took over and pulled me under. Nothing touched me. Nothing spoke. But that didn't make it better. Because the worst part wasn't what it did. It was the certainty that it was there. After that night, strange things kept happening in that house. Doors would slam shut without any wind. Not gently close. Slam. Hard. Sometimes when no one else was home. Sometimes when everyone was downstairs and the doors upstairs weren't even closed to begin with. It wasn't just one door either. It happened to different doors at different times with no clear explanation. I never saw that shadow again the way I did that night. But I never forgot how it felt. Even now, years later, I can still remember the exact weight of that fear. The way the room felt wrong. The way my body reacted before my mind could catch up. The way I knew deep down that whatever it was didn't want anything good for me. People like to explain things like that away. Sleep paralysis, night terrors, stress, imagination. Maybe they're right, but I know this. I've been scared before and since. Nothing has ever felt like that. And that dark alcove across the room never felt empty again. When people talk about my high school as the one involving the Dika advisor and the so-called ghost hunts. On paper, it sounds ridiculous. A business club going ghost hunting after competitions. But the more you hear about it, and the more people who independently tell the same details, the harder it is to laugh it off completely. The Deka advisor was not a stereotypical ghost hunter type. He wasn't dramatic, didn't believe in orbs or nonsense videos on the internet, and never tried to convince students that the school was haunted. In fact, most of the time he framed these late-night explorations as curiosity exercises. He'd say that if students were already staying late for competitions or events, they might as well see the building in a different light. He always emphasized that they weren't there to provoke anything, summon anything, or challenge whatever might be in the building. They were just observing, listening, and documenting anything strange. That distinction mattered, because even skeptics admitted that the school at night felt wrong. Not scary in a cheap way, but heavy. Quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. The kind of quiet that makes every sound stand out too clearly. The advisor had worked at the school for years, longer than most staff, and he openly admitted that there were areas he didn't like being in after dark. The auditorium was at the top of that list. The auditorium had a reputation all its own. Even during the day, it felt different from the rest of the building. The ceilings were higher, the lighting dimmer, and the air always felt cooler, no matter the season. Sound behaved strangely in there. A whisper from the stage could carry all the way to the back row, while a normal speaking voice sometimes seemed to disappear entirely. Students joked about it, but stage crew members and drama kids were more serious. They'd talk about footsteps on the catwalk when no one was up there, lights flicking on and off, and props being moved overnight. The advisor said that every year, without fail, someone would have an experience in that room. Not always dramatic, but enough to make people uneasy. A door opening on its own. A sudden cold draft. A sound that couldn't be explained. Still, nothing had ever escalated beyond, "That was weird," until one night after a competition. The group had just gotten back late. It was around 10 at night, maybe a little after. Everyone was tired, wired from the long day, running on junk food, caffeine, and adrenaline. Normally, they would have just gone home, but someone suggested doing a quick walk through the building since they were already there. Not a full ghost hunt. Just a quick look around. The advisor hesitated first. He later admitted that he had a bad feeling about it, but he chalked it up to exhaustion. There were about a dozen students with him, all responsible. Upperclassmen for the most part. The building was locked, alarms set for most areas, but they had permission to be there. They kept the lights mostly off, relying on emergency lighting and flashlights, partly out of respect and partly because that's just how these things were usually done. When they reached the auditorium, the mood shifted. Even the loudest students went quiet. The room swallowed sound in a way that made talking feel inappropriate, like speaking too loudly in a church. The advisor unlocked the door and let everyone file in. The stage was dark. The seating area stretched out in rows, disappearing into shadow. The only light came from exit signs and a few dim work lights near the wings. They stood there for a moment, just listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no movement, just the low hum of the building settling. Some of the students started whispering, pointing out things they'd heard over the years. One mentioned that a stagehand once quit after seeing something move behind the curtains. Another said their drama teacher refused to go under the stage alone. The advisor told them to keep it down and reminded them that fear feeds imagination. Then it happened. Without warning, there was a loud crash on the stage, not a subtle sound. Not a creak or a knock. A full, violent clatter like metal and wood slamming into each other. Several prop spears that had been stored upright in a rack near the back of the stage had fallen all at once. The sound echoed through the auditorium, bouncing off the walls and ceiling in a way that made it feel even louder than it was. For a split second, no one moved. Then instinct took over. Someone yelled. Another student gasped. The advisor immediately shouted for everyone to stay together and turned the lights on. The stage lights flooded the room in harsh white, erasing the shadows instantly. The spears were scattered across the stage floor. No one was there. No stage crew. No students hiding. No pranksters. Nothing. The advisor moved quickly, scanning the stage and the wings. He checked behind the curtains, under the risers, and along the back wall. A few of the braver students followed, while the rest stayed frozen in their seats, hearts pounding. There was no one. What made it worse was that those spears were not easy to knock over accidentally. They were heavy, balanced carefully, and positioned in a way that required deliberate force to topple them. Even a strong gust of air wouldn't have been enough to send all of them crashing down at once. Someone suggested maybe the rack was unstable. Another student nervously laughed and said maybe someone had set it up wrong earlier. The advisor didn't say much. He just frowned and kept looking around, clearly unsettled. Then someone asked about the trap door. Under the stage was a crawl space and trap door system that ran beneath parts of the auditorium. It was old, used decades ago for stage effects and storage. Normally, it was kept locked for safety reasons. The advisor knew this because he was one of the people responsible for making sure it stayed that way. They all went to check it. The trapdoor was exactly as it should have been, padlocked from the top side. No signs of tampering, no scratches, no movement. It hadn't been opened. That detail changed everything. If someone had been under the stage, they couldn't have gotten out. If someone had been on the stage, they would have been seen when the lights came on. There was no realistic way for a person to have caused that crash and then vanished in seconds. The advisor called it right there. He told everyone to leave the auditorium immediately. No more exploring, no more questions. They locked the door, turned off the lights, and walked out together. No one argued. No one joked. Whatever excitement they'd had about an impromptu ghost hunt was completely gone. On the way out of the building, one of the students asked if they could come back another night and try again. The advisor said no. He told them that curiosity was one thing, but disrespecting a place that clearly didn't want attention was another. He said that whatever happened in that auditorium didn't feel playful or accidental. It felt like a warning. Over the years, the story spread. Students graduated and told it to younger siblings. Faculty quietly confirmed parts of it. No one ever added dramatic embellishments. In fact, the story stayed remarkably consistent. Same time, same place, same details. The spears, the lights, the locked trapdoor. What made it especially unsettling was that no one involved ever claimed to see anything. There was no figure, no shadow, no face in the dark. Just action without a visible actor. Cause without an obvious source. That seems to be a theme with that building. Things don't show themselves directly. They make their presence known through sound, movement, and timing. Through moments that leave you standing there, trying to convince yourself you didn't just witness something impossible. After hearing that story, I started paying more attention to how people behaved around the auditorium. Teachers avoided it at night unless absolutely necessary. Custodians worked in pairs there. Drama kids joked about it during rehearsals, but I noticed how quickly they shut up when the lights went out. Even during assemblies, there was a strange feeling when the room went quiet, like the space itself was listening. I don't know what knocked those spears over. I don't know if it was something paranormal or some freak coincidence that just happened at the worst possible time. But I do know this. A dozen people heard something heavy crash to the floor. They turned on the lights immediately. No one was there. And the only possible hidden access point was still padlocked shut. In a building where doors slam on their own, footsteps echo in empty halls, and teachers refuse to be alone after dark, that story fits in far too well. Sometimes it's not about seeing a ghost. Sometimes it's about realizing that something can still interact with the world around you, even if you never see its face. And once you realize that, it becomes very hard to feel alone in that building ever again. This happened about 15 years ago, and even now it still makes my stomach tighten when I think about it. At the time, I was working at a smallish company, around 75 employees total. It wasn't a huge place, but it was big enough that you didn't know everyone well, just well enough to recognize faces, and have a general sense of who people were. The owner of the company decided to sell. And when the new owners came in, they didn't waste any time. They cleaned house almost immediately. About 15 people were fired in one sweep. It completely changed the atmosphere of the place. Everyone was on edge, wondering if they were next, and trying to process how quickly things had shifted. One of the people who was fired was a guy I worked with, who I'll call Dave. Dave was odd. That's the best word I could use. He had a short fuse and would sometimes yell at people over small things. He didn't really get along with most of the staff. On top of that, he had some personal hygiene issues, like really bad dandruff and body odor, which didn't help his social standing at all. Because of all that, a lot of people weren't exactly sad to see him go, and his firing didn't surprise many of us. Dave, however, was completely shocked. He had been there for several years and clearly thought his job was secure. You could tell the firing hit him hard. He took it very personally and seemed to feel deeply betrayed by the company. About a week after the mass firing, I was at work when I got a phone call. It was Dave. He sounded calm at first and told me he wanted to take me out to lunch as a thank you. Apparently, I had recently shown him how to run a few different machines at work, and he said that knowledge would help him find another job. I didn't think much of it. I figured he was just being polite, and honestly, I felt a little bad for him. I agreed. A few days later, around lunchtime, Dave showed up. I assumed he was taking several people out, maybe a small group. but it quickly became clear that it was just me. That alone felt a little awkward, but I brushed it off. Lunch started out fine enough. We made small talk, talked about work, and then the conversation shifted. Dave started talking about being fired. He was clearly still very angry. He vented a lot, saying how unfair it was, how the new owners didn't appreciate him, how he had given years of his life to the company. I listened and tried to be sympathetic. Losing a job like that can really mess with someone's head, and I didn't want to dismiss his feelings. As lunch went on, though, things started to feel off. Dave began saying that I was one of the only people at the company he actually liked. That alone wasn't a problem. But then he followed it up by saying there were people there he would love to hurt. The way he said it wasn't joking. It wasn't exaggerated for effect. It was flat, bitter, and very serious. I felt uncomfortable. But I told myself he was just blowing off steam. People say things they don't mean when they're angry, right? Then we got back into his car so he could drive me back to work. That's when my blood really started to run cold. As we were driving, he started talking about how easy it would be to hurt people at the company. He talked about locking the doors from the outside with boards and burning the place down or just doing damage to the building. He said it in this casual, matter-of-fact way, like he was describing a home improvement project, not violent crimes. I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, trying to decide if I was overreacting or if I was actually in danger sitting in that car with him. As we pulled into the parking lot, he looked at me and said something that still makes my skin crawl. He told me not to worry, because even if he did hurt some of the people there, I was his friend. The way he said it wasn't comforting. It was chilling. It felt like a promise and a threat wrapped into one sentence. I said goodbye as calmly as I could, got out of the car, and went back inside the building. My hands were shaking, but I tried to act normal. There was a window near my boss's desk that overlooked the parking lot, and from there I could see Dave's car clearly. He wasn't leaving. He was just sitting there in his car, parked in the lot. Minutes passed. Lunch break ended. People started filtering back to their desks and getting back to work. Dave was still sitting there, not moving, not driving away, just sitting. At that point, I knew something was very wrong. I went straight to my boss and told him we needed to call 911. I explained that Dave had said some disturbing things, that I was genuinely afraid he might hurt someone. To his credit, my boss took it seriously immediately. He didn't argue or downplay it. He picked up the phone and called the police. The police arrived within a few minutes. They approached Dave's car, talked to him, and eventually got him out of the vehicle. They put him in the back of the police car. Then they used his keys to open the trunk of his car. Inside the trunk, they found boards, rope, and several guns. Seeing that confirmed every fear I had been trying to push down. Whatever Dave had been planning, it wasn't harmless venting. It was real, and it was close. The police talked to him for a while longer. In the end, he agreed to be taken into custody and to get help. I don't know exactly what happened to him after that. I don't know if he would have actually gone through with anything, or if the police intervention stopped him just in time. What I do know is that the way our building was designed, if he had decided to start shooting, he could have hurt or killed a lot of people in a very short amount of time. That thought still makes me feel sick. I was so shaken that I couldn't focus on work for the rest of the day. I kept replaying the lunch conversation in my head, thinking about how easily I could have ignored it, how close it felt to something truly horrific happening. To this day, I'm grateful I trusted my instincts and said something. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't. This happened about 9 or 10 years ago, and even now, thinking about it still gives me chills. It's one of those memories that seems normal at first, almost forgettable, until you realize how close you were to something truly horrific. Back then, I was friends with a guy who ran a land center. For anyone who doesn't know, it was basically a place filled with computers where people could come and play games together. This was before everyone had amazing setups at home, so places like this were popular. Every Friday night, he would host gaming parties, and they were always packed. Friends, regulars, and random people would show up. It was loud, chaotic, and a lot of fun. The land center was located inside an old shopping mall. Not one of those modern, bright malls, but an aging one that had clearly seen better days. A lot of the shops were closed or barely hanging on. During the day, it felt dull and empty, but at night, it felt straight up eerie. The lights were dimmer, the halls echoed, and there was always this strange, hollow feeling, like the place was half abandoned. To get into the land center at night, you couldn't use the main entrances. Those were locked once the mall closed. Instead, you had to go around back, where there was a service entrance. A night guard was stationed there, and he would let people in and out as needed. It wasn't unusual. We all knew the routine, and most of us recognized the guard on duty since it was usually the same guy. That particular Friday night was no different from any other. The place was full, everyone was laughing, shouting over headsets, trash-talking in games, ordering food. At some point, I realized that a bunch of us were hungry and thirsty, and since the nearby food places were about to close, I volunteered to do a food and drinks run. I took everyone's orders, grabbed some cash, and headed out. I walked to the back door, expecting it to be unlocked or at least easy to open. It wasn't. The door was locked. That wasn't unusual either. Sometimes the guard locked it and waited inside his office until someone needed to leave. I waited a moment, then knocked and called out for him. After a few seconds, he appeared from behind the door of his office. I remember this clearly. He opened the door, looked at me, and let me out. Nothing about him seemed strange at the time. He didn't look nervous or rushed. He didn't act aggressive. He just did his job. I went out, got the food and drinks, and came back maybe 30 to 40 minutes later. When I returned, the guard was already waiting for me at the door. Again, nothing seemed off. He opened the door, I went back inside, and the night continued like normal. We ate, played games, joked around, and eventually everyone went home. The weekend passed without anything unusual happening. On Monday after school, I decided to stop by the land center just to hang out for a bit. It wasn't uncommon for me to drop in even when there wasn't an event. As soon as I got to the mall, though, something felt wrong. There were police cars everywhere, not just one or two, several. The mall entrance was partially blocked off, and there was a smell in the air that I can only describe as awful. It was heavy, sour, and made my stomach turn. A few of the shops were closed completely, and the cops were telling people they couldn't stay or walk around inside for long. I didn't know what was going on, but it was clear something bad had happened. I didn't stick around. I went home, confused and unsettled, but not yet scared. That night, everything changed. I was watching the news when they ran a story about the mall. A woman who managed the shopping center had been murdered. According to the report, she had discovered that one of the night guards was stealing. When she confronted him about it, he killed her. He then stuffed her body into garbage bags and hid her inside his locker. As the news anchor kept talking, my heart started pounding harder and harder. They said the murder had taken place on Friday night. Forensics estimated the time of death to be somewhere around 9 to 10 p.m. That time window hit me like a punch to the chest. That was the exact time I had gone out for the food run. Then they showed a picture of the suspect. The moment I saw his face, my blood went cold. It was him, the night guard. The same guy who had opened the door for me. The same guy who had been sitting calmly in his office. The same guy who had let me back in after my food run. The same guy who had been only a few feet away from where the murder had taken place. I just sat there staring at the TV, barely breathing. The back door I used was just a few feet from the guard's office. That office was where the woman had been killed. That meant that when I knocked on the door that night, when I called out to be let in, when he stepped out to open the door for me, her body may have already been there. Or worse, she may have still been alive when I was standing on the other side of that door. The realization made me feel sick. I started replaying everything in my head. His face, his movements, the way he didn't seem rushed or panicked. The fact that he was waiting for me when I came back. The fact that nothing about his behavior stood out as dangerous or wrong at the time. That's what scared me the most. There were no warning signs. No obvious red flags. No dramatic moment where I thought, something is off about this guy. He just looked like a normal night guard doing his job. And yet, hours earlier, or maybe even minutes earlier, he had murdered someone. I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had been, how easily I could have become involved. What if I had gone out earlier? What if I had stayed outside longer? What if I had accidentally walked past the wrong door or knocked at the wrong moment? What if he thought I had seen something I wasn't supposed to see? The thought that I had been standing only feet away from a brutal crime scene, completely unaware, still makes my skin crawl. For a long time after that, I had trouble going into empty or closed spaces. I became hyper-aware of people who worked security jobs, not because I thought they were all dangerous, but because it shattered my belief that you can always tell when someone is capable of something terrible. You can't. Sometimes the most horrifying things happen quietly, right next to you, while you're focused on something as normal as grabbing food for friends. Even now, remembering that night gives me the shivers. Not because of ghosts or monsters or anything supernatural, but because of how thin the line really is between an ordinary night and a tragedy. And because I still don't know how close I came to being part of it. My grandpa was a theater professor at Kansas State University for many years. And because of that, I grew up hearing stories about one particular performance space on campus. There's a ghost there, and he's not some obscure rumor that only one or two people talk about. He's well known. Staff know about him, students know about him. He even has a name. Nick. The theater is located underneath the old football stadium, which already gives the place an odd feeling. It's underground, concrete heavy, and cut off from natural light. Sounds behave strangely down there. Footsteps echo longer than they should. Voices carry in odd ways. Even during the day, it feels a little detached from the rest of campus. At night, especially late at night, it feels completely isolated. The story goes that Nick was a football player back when the stadium was still actively used above the theater. He took a brutal hit during a game, was seriously injured, and died while waiting for medical treatment. Whether that part is historically accurate or not, everyone agrees on one thing. Whatever is down there does not behave like a residual haunting. It's interactive. And it has a sense of humor. Nick is known for being mischievous. My grandpa was not the type to exaggerate or make things up for entertainment. He was practical, logical, and had no interest in scaring people for fun. When he talked about Nick, It was always matter of fact, almost annoyed, like talking about a coworker who liked to pull pranks. His first encounter happened around 2 in the morning. He was alone in the theater, painting sets for an upcoming production. This was normal for him. Theater professors work strange hours, especially when shows are approaching. The building was locked. He knew for a fact that no one else was inside. No students, no janitors, no security walking through. Just him, the silence, and the smell of paint. At one point, he turned his back for just a second to grab something. He heard a loud crash behind him. When he turned around, one of his paint buckets had flown across the room. Not tipped over, not knocked off a table, thrown. It had traveled roughly 10 feet from where it had been sitting and landed on its side, paint spilling across the floor. There was no slope, no vibration, no explanation. He stood there for a moment, staring at it, trying to rationalize what he'd just seen. Eventually, he muttered something like, "Very funny," cleaned it up and kept working. That was the kind of person he was. He didn't panic. He didn't run. He just accepted that something weird had happened and moved on. Another early morning encounter happened not long after. Same general setup. Late night or early morning. Grandpa alone in the theater. Doors locked. No one else present. This time he was setting up folding chairs for a performance. There were over 100 of them, stacked neatly in rows, ready to be arranged. He stepped away briefly to use the restroom, gone for only a few minutes. When he came back, the chairs were no longer where he left them. Every single chair had been moved. They were stacked into one massive pile in the middle of the room, almost reaching the ceiling. Not sloppily thrown together either. They were balanced in a way that would have taken time, effort, and coordination. Something that would have been loud and obvious if a group of people had done it. He was alone. There was no one to help, no one to blame. No way someone could have come in, done that, and left without him noticing. He just stared at the pile, shook his head, and started taking them down one by one. Again, annoyed more than afraid, like dealing with an especially persistent prankster. It wasn't just my grandpa either. There were multiple incidents witnessed by entire groups of people. One time, my grandpa and a full classroom of students saw a fire extinguisher lift off the wall and fly through the air. Not fall, not swing, fly. Across the room, in front of everyone. No wires, no tricks, no explanation. Nick wasn't subtle. What made the whole thing oddly amusing, at least to people who worked there long enough, was the personality behind it. Nick never hurt anyone. He never caused serious damage. He didn't shove people or trap them or threaten them. He just messed with things. He moved objects. He made noise. He disrupted rehearsals at inconvenient moments. It felt intentional, almost playful. There was a running joke among the theater folks that Nick was just continuing a rivalry that existed even in life. A football player haunting a theater under a stadium, messing with drama students and professors. Jocks messing with drama nerds, even after death. My grandpa never said he was scared of Nick, but he respected him. People learned to acknowledge him, to say hello when entering late at night, to ask him politely to stop when things got out of hand. Some swore that worked. Others said ignoring him made things worse. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, the sheer number of witnesses, the consistency of the stories, and the fact that they span decades makes it hard to completely dismiss. These weren't just sleep-deprived students or people looking for attention. These were professors, technicians, entire classes, all seeing and experiencing the same things in the same space. Nick became part of the theater's identity. A strange, unseen presence under the stadium, flipping buckets, stacking chairs and occasionally launching fire extinguishers just to remind everyone that the space wasn't entirely theirs. And honestly, if there is a ghost haunting a theater under a football stadium, the idea that he's a bored athlete still messing with theater kids feels almost perfect. The Sewol ferry disaster is one of those events that stays disturbing no matter how much time passes. It isn't just a tragedy caused by nature or bad luck. What makes it unbearable is that it was preventable, and that so many people who should have acted chose not to. Hundreds of children, teachers, and ordinary passengers were left to die while the people responsible for them escaped, and the authorities stood by watching. The ferry was carrying 476 people. Most of them were high school students on a school trip, excited and relaxed, filming videos, laughing, texting their parents, doing the normal things teenagers do when they think they are safe. Teachers were with them. Crew members were on board. This was supposed to be a routine journey. When the ship began to list, confusion spread quickly. At first, many passengers didn't understand what was happening. They were told over the intercom to stay where they were, to remain calm, to not move. For students who had been raised to listen to authority, especially in a school setting, those instructions mattered. They trusted the adults in charge. They believed that staying put was the safest thing to do. That trust killed them. As the ferry tilted more and more, water began entering the ship. Time passed. Not minutes, but long stretches of time where evacuation could have happened. Nearly 2 hours passed before the ferry fully tipped over. 2 hours where lives could have been saved. The captain did not stay. He escaped early. He left the ship while passengers were still inside, still waiting, still following orders. The image of him stepping onto a rescue vessel while hundreds of children remained trapped inside is one of the most haunting details of the disaster. Leadership did not just fail in that moment. It vanished. What makes it worse is what happened outside the ship. The Coast Guard arrived. Rescue boats were there. They were not unaware of the situation. They were not too late. They were right there, watching the ferry sink. And yet they did not immediately go in to evacuate the passengers. They did not rush inside to pull people out. They did not dive to retrieve the trapped students. Instead, civilians did. Ordinary people, fishermen, volunteers, people with no obligation beyond basic human decency, were the ones who tried to help. They went into the water. They dove. They tried to reach whoever they could. Meanwhile, official rescue efforts were slow, hesitant, and painfully inadequate. Students inside the ferry were recording videos during this time. That fact alone is devastating. There are recordings of kids calmly talking, joking nervously, asking what's happening, saying they're scared, messaging their parents to tell them they love them. Some of them believed they would be rescued any moment. Some of them reassured their families. Some of them were still following the instructions to stay put, even as the ship tilted further and further. Those recordings are hard to watch because they showed the exact moment hope still existed. And that hope was betrayed. As the ferry finally tipped and submerged, those who were still inside had no chance. Water filled the compartments. Escape routes disappeared. Panic came too late for many of them. In the end, 304 people died. Most of them were students. What followed was almost as disturbing as the disaster itself. The bodies were not immediately recovered. The ferry itself was not raised for years. 3 years passed before the wreck was fully retrieved. 3 years of families waiting. 3 years of unanswered questions. 3 years of anger, grief, and the feeling that the truth was being delayed, buried, or avoided. Parents stood at the harbor day after day, watching the sea, hoping for news that never came. Many of them had watched their children's final moments through recorded videos and text messages. They knew their children had been alive for a long time after the accident began. They knew rescue was possible. That knowledge made the waiting unbearable. The official explanations never satisfied them. Why were passengers told to stay where they were? Why did the captain abandon the ship? Why did trained rescue personnel hesitate while civilians acted? Why did it take years to retrieve the ferry? These questions still echo. The disaster became a national trauma in South Korea. It wasn't just about one ship sinking. It exposed deep problems in responsibility, authority, corruption, and the culture of obedience that discourages questioning orders, even when those orders are clearly wrong. It showed what happens when systems protect themselves instead of the people they are meant to serve. The anger wasn't just directed at individuals, but at institutions, the Coast Guard's inaction, the lack of clear leadership, the delayed rescue, the slow investigation. All of it contributed to the feeling that the passengers were abandoned long before the ship fully sank. Years later, documentaries, investigations, and recordings continued to surface. One of the most powerful short documentaries was made by The New Yorker, Foul, which lays out the events clearly and respectfully, focusing on the human cost rather than sensationalism. Watching it is painful, but important. It shows how much time there really was, how close rescue really was, how different the outcome could have been. There are also videos compiled from students' own recordings. The title of one widely shared video is misleading, but the content itself is devastating. It doesn't rely on commentary. It doesn't need to. The voices of the students are enough. Their calm, their confusion, their trust. That trust is the hardest thing to forgive. They did what they were told. They believed the adults in charge would protect them. They believed help was coming. And for a long time, help was close enough to see. But it didn't come. The Sewol ferry disaster isn't just a story about a ship sinking. It's about what happens when authority fails and no one steps in to replace it. It's about how obedience can become deadly. It's about how systems can value procedure over people. And it's about how children paid the price for those failures. Even now, years later, the images and recordings still haunt people. The empty classrooms, the memorials, the parents who will never stop asking why. The knowledge that survival was possible makes the loss heavier, not lighter. Some tragedies feel inevitable. This wasn't one of them. That's why it still hurts to talk about. That's why people still share the documentaries and recordings. Because remembering isn't just about mourning the dead. It's about refusing to let the failures that caused their deaths fade into silence. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survived things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can. If you're still here, then these stories didn't simply fade away. They settled in. Every story you heard tonight came from real moments, real people, and real situations where something felt off or nearly went wrong. If you want to keep exploring stories that linger in your thoughts long after the night grows quiet, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers. There are more stories waiting in the dark, and not all of them let you leave in time.